Okay, so now we've gone through most of the actual real hard technical stuff. We've now learned about schemas and instance documents. We learned a little bit about conformance. We know about all these different document types, all these different schema types, and how they all fit together. Now all that's really left for the message spec development is to get it together and get our documentation together. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about documentation. Let's talk about the different things that are there. So in general, here's just a quick list. There's an IPD catalog, later called, it was originally called MPD catalog. You'll see that as well. Actually, it was originally IPD catalog, then it became MPD catalog. Then it went back to IPD catalog, and it'll be something different in NIEM 6 as we get the term message specification in wider use. The catalog does two things. It's an XML file, and it provides metadata about the message spec itself. So that's where things are, the people involved, what it's about, the title of it, metadata like that. It also has a list of every file in the message spec and what role that file plays. The idea being there that you should be able to at some point upload a message spec to a repository, and the repository could consume it automatically. Read the IPD catalog to see what all the metadata is about that message spec, as well as understand what all the different files are and what they do, so that it can treat them appropriately. There's also a README file. There is also a changelog. So the README file is just a README file. It's just a file that gives you an introduction to the message spec, what's going on, what the deal is. It's not full-blown, here's all the documentation about it. It's just a README. It's a place to start. There's a changelog file that goes in there that just lists the changes that have been made to this message spec over time, so you can see what the development process has been like. There's a conformance assertion that is your assertion that you're conforming. So this brings up the issue of who checks my work to make sure I've done my NIEM stuff correctly. And the answer is nobody checks your work to make sure that you've done your work correctly. There is no certification process. There is a conformance tool, Contessa, which we have yet to see, but we will. And Contessa will check a lot of your work, but it's not a stamp of approval. It's not a you did it all right. Rather, you assert that you've conformed, and you list the reasons why, the steps you took to find that out. There's a mapping spreadsheet that we've been working with, so we have that big mapping spreadsheet. And then there's something called the master documentation. So let's talk about the master documentation first, and then we can look at some of the other files. Master documentation. It's just a Word document, so don't get wrapped up on what it has to go in my master documentation. It's a Word document, could be something else, could be PDF, could be whatever, but typically it's a Word document. And it just tells people what the message exchange is about. So it should have things in it like the purpose of it, the scope, what's the business value, some information about the exchange itself, not everything about the exchange, but just some general high-level information, who the senders are, who the receivers are, what sort of interactions there are, references to other documentation, if that's applicable, just things like that. Literally anything you want to have in your master documentation that explains what's going on with the exchange is fair game. The only thing you really shouldn't do is paste schemas into them. Don't paste schemas into them, it won't work well. I have seen message specification, master documentation documents that people have pasted schemas in, and all it does, it wraps horribly, it looks horrible, it doesn't make any sense, nobody wants to read them, it just pads out the documentation with dozens of pages and nobody could ever read, so don't do it. Anything else though can go in there. Information about security needs can go in there. Information about privacy concerns should go in there. Anything you want can go in there. Other than schemas, don't paste schemas into them. Let's take an example look. Now, I don't have a sample master documentation for the IPD because I'd just be making up a bunch of stuff, and that just seems kind of silly when I can show you real ones. So here's a real one. This is a project I worked on, although I did not work on this particular document. This is NIES, the National Electronic Interchange Compact Enterprise, and it's all about being able to place children. It's all exchanges designed for the placement of children in foster homes so that those children can be safe and can thrive. So that's the whole idea. A really good project to work with. And here is this is publicly available. You can go to the Health and Human Services website and you can find this and you can download it. And so this is public information. This is nothing secret. This is public information. This is their master document. So they got an overview section, talks about what's going on. Now the details of this don't matter. It doesn't matter what the details are. What matters is that you just kind of see the kind of things. So here's an overview of it. Talks about the purpose of this document, what it does. Talks about what NIES is about. Talks about how it gets funded. States pay annual fees. There's definitions. So you want to know what they mean by a child. You want to know what an ICPC is, an ICPC case data. If you want to know more about NIES case management systems, if you want to know about the clearinghouse, if you want to note that they have a typo and they should have put a space there, if you want to know what resources are, what do they mean by a resource, what do they mean by the receiving agency in state and the sending agency in state, all that information's there. Background, how did they get here, how did this thing whole start, what's going on with it, all that information is there. Historic information about the exchange, how it probably started as paper documents and where it's gone. They've got the process flow, so they've got some diagrams here to show the process that happens. And in some parts it used to be really postal mail. You would put something in the mail and physically mail it to somebody. So it talks all about the flow, talks about where things go. Again, details don't matter. What matters is you get a feel for the kind of information. Then you've got some more diagrams showing sending and receiving states, where the exchange fits into that, the different systems that are involved. And there's talk about how do you connect to it. There's a hub for this, and you can connect to it. So it talks all about that. There's a clearinghouse. Talks about the IPD and how it relates to NIES. Now I know it looks like it's misspelled. That's how it's spelled. It is pronounced NIES, just like it was IECE. Then there's a list of the artifacts. These are the same kind of things that go in a catalog document, but nothing wrong with having them here as well to say, here are the different parts of it. So there are exchange files, there's an exchange schema, there's an extension schema, there's a separate schema for the code tables. Again, that's very common to put code tables in a separate schema. It's a good idea if you have a lot of code tables. There's the subset, there's the want list, there's instance documents. And something I didn't mention with instance documents is they do a whole bunch. They pack a bunch of different sorts of requests, different sorts of queries into one IAPD. So they have several different ones that all validate against the same set of schemas, and that's one way to do it. But you could also organize things differently. You could organize it to where you had separate exchange schemas, one for each one of these exchanges with a common extension. But what I also tend to do with instance documents is I usually do three per exchange. I do one that's minimal. It's the minimum amount of stuff that this IPD wants in an instance document, because a lot of times a lot of the information will be optional. So here's a minimal version. Then I'll do a maximal version. Now it's not really maximal, because if it's something is 0 to unbounded, you could have as many as you want. But I'll build everything out. I'll put in all the details that the IPD supports. And then I'll do one that's in between. I will do one that is a typical instance document. Here's typically what you'd see. It's not minimal, it's not fully built out, but it's something that's typical. But you roll your instance documents the way you want to roll your instance documents. I like to have 3 varieties to show different aspects. You're required to have one per exchange. In this case, they have a bunch of different, they have 6 different exchanges all packed into the one IPD, and a separate instance document to show you each one. Master documentation, that's what we're looking at. Then they have other documentation that came along with it. They have samples of 100A and 100B stuff, which this isn't a class on NIES, so I'm not going to explain what those are. But there are sample documents as part of the IPD. There's a cover sheet that shows the transmittal data. There's a domain model, that's their UML diagram. There's a mapping spreadsheet. There's a change log, and then there's a catalog, and then there's the metadata that came along with it as part of the catalog. Then finally, there's a project team. So these are the folks who worked on this particular one. I don't know Marcy, but I know Chandra and Raghu, and they're both really, really cool folks. I had a lot of fun. I worked on this project to update this to a newer version of NIEM and add a few extra things. So I didn't build NIES. I just helped them update it to a newer version. But really great project, really nice thing to be involved in. But that's what master documentation stuff looks like. It's nothing special, it's nothing secret, it's not technical, it's just a Word document explaining stuff about the exchange so other people can read that document and know what's going on. So here's the crash driver IPD. These are the files for it. Now I don't have the mapping spreadsheet here because I've got that elsewhere so I can pull it into my notes easily. But here the rest of the files, where there's a changelog file, and what does that look like? Well, that's just a text file. I mean, actually this is a markdown file. I like markdown. Markdown is a way of formatting text files. It's somewhere in between plain text and HTML, if you want to look at it that way. But it's got a title, IEPD changelog, and then there's just a list in reverse chronological order. Dr. Scott Renner did the first version of this way back in 2019 to illustrate different things that NIEM can do. And then last year, in 2021, he updated it, and that's where it's kind of his version 1.0, where he put it out there for people to look at. And then I took it and I made some changes for training. So I made training changes for it last September. So this is version 2.0. I updated it to NIEM 5. It was on an early version of NIEM. He had a person fictional character indicator as a means of making a new, here's going to make a new simple element. And I didn't like that. I changed that to defenestration. That just seemed better to me for the IPD and for the idea of the crash. He had a measure for how wide your driver's license was, and I was like, oh, you know, they're standardized, that's silly. I took that out, and that became adding the email address, which is arguably silly as well, but I think less silly. I added the GML external stuff to the sample instance. It wasn't there, and we added the defenestration indicator, added the contact email. So it's what went on with it to get to where it is. There's a conformance statement. So here's our conformance statement. We conform to NIEM. These are the things we conform to. There's a conformance standard spec that we haven't really talked a lot about that you don't really have to worry about. Just put that one attribute in. But we also conform to the naming design rules and to the IEPD spec. Conform to all these different things. We have who the author is here. And we have who's certified that it conforms. And now this isn't really a certification. And this is not exactly how your conformance assertion needs to look. This is how ours looks for the sample, though. Certified by me. I went and did all the checks, ran it against tools. When did I certify it? In September, about the time I wrote it. I made changes to it. How was it verified? And then there's a list of here are the different things we did. We used our XML schema tools. We looked at it manually. We used online tools. What do we use to do it? We use the SSGT. We use Oxygen. We use Xerxes, which is a validator. It's built into Oxygen, probably built into XML Spy as well. The results, we didn't find anything wrong. Everything passed the test, and we think everything is cool. So that's our conformance statement. Then there is the IEPD catalog. Let's look at that. Let's look at that, though, in an XML editor, because that's XML. So here is the catalog file that tells us, number one, metadata. So here we go. Here's information about the IEPD. Who's the authoritative source for it? It's the organization. What's the name of the organization? Training office. I made that up. There wasn't a training office organization. Who's the contact information? Well, it's this person here. The name's Tom Carlson. Cool. And you get down to a creation date. When was it created? That's really off. That should be changed because that's really off. And there's conformance target information. We give it an ID of sorts, but mainly it's descriptive text. It's a sample IEPD representing all the major technical aspects of NIEM. That's what it's for. That's really what it's doing. It's there as a test bed to show all the different things. It has a document element. This is the root element, crash driver info. So even if you pack everything into one extension schema, which is perfectly fine to do, you can still tell people what the root element is by putting it here in the catalog file. People need to know to look for it here, but it is there. There's a spot to say that. And then we have a catalog file. I haven't looked at XML catalog files. We will in just a second. And then IEPD sample document. Where's the sample document that validates against all this? And it's here. This is where it is. It's in the IEPD sample, IEP sample, crash driver sample.xml. So that's the metadata. And we get to the end of that. And now the rest of it is, here are the files that make up this IEPD and what they're all about. So, is there a README file? Sure is, called readme.md for Markdown. Is there a changelog file? Yep, it's called that. There's a conformance assertion. It's called that. There's a want list. It's called that. There are two extension documents. One is our exchange, one is our extension document. Here's where they are. Now, they're both extension documents, but one is kind of a special one. And then the rest is reference schema, are down to here. These are reference schemas. These are schemas out of NIEM. These are the actual NIEM schemas. Everyone that's being used so that something reading this knows what all these files are and what they're for and where they're located. So these are all the reference documents. These are the reference schemas. These are NIEM. And then finally at the end, the stuff, didn't mean to drag it everywhere though. Then the last three here are the schemas that define the external standard stuff. So and these are just kind of related. Here's the GML one. That's the main one for us. And so that's a list of everything. It's a list of all the files here and what they mean, what role they play, where they're located in the IEPD, in the message spec. So we were looking at artifacts. Let's go back to our artifacts. We put a JSON sample in there for fun. We didn't have to, but we did anyway. We have a README file, the README file. This is an example IEPD designed for the training program. Exercises most of the features in the NDR. And there you see all the things we looked at. We looked at all these different things. We looked at adapters and associations and augmentations and elements and references and even repeated elements, person, middle name. You have multiple person, middle names. Some of these things are very esoteric. And some of them are going away. The structures relationship metadata, that's probably going to go away in NIEM 6. Nobody uses it. We're going to take it out. We've got language attributes and other ones, but we don't really use these, so we haven't talked about them much. And then finally a note that we do have a JSON version. We auto-generated it with a tool that Dr. Scott Renner wrote to actually go from XML to JSON in a NIEM context. And then finally, current version was manually updated from those original files to match the XML version. So basically we just made sure everything held together right. So that's the README file. And that's all that goes in a README file. Not a whole lot to it. The last thing is an XML catalog. And the XML catalog is simply a mapping of URL names, or namespace names to files. Namespace name to a file. So here at this level, all it's doing is mapping the extension stuff to where those files go. Now if I look in here, if I look in the XSD directory where all the schemas go, there's also a catalog file there. Let's load it up in an editor so it's nice and pretty. This catalog is just a mapping of namespaces. Here is here's the Justice Domain namespace name. And here's where it is. Here's where it's located. Now what this all is for is to allow you to control how things get put together. You remember that diagram where I showed all the schemas pulling each other in? You don't really have a lot of control over the ordering and how that actually happens. So this gives us a way to link those things together and say, hey, these are the files, here's the order to bring them in. You don't have to worry about them. They get automatically generated for you out of the SSGT. So don't have to worry about them. So that's pretty much all the documentation stuff. All that leaves us with in terms of documentation is assembling the stuff. How do you put it together? Well, okay, they're just zip files. They're just zip files. So if I want to package up the crash driver IEPD, here's the crash driver IEPD, I right click, I say compress, there, that's an IEPD. That's an IEPD package. That's a message specification package. That's it. It's just a zip file of those artifacts. Put them all together in a folder, zip them together, ta-da, you've packaged it up. That's all they are. On Windows, pretty much the same, right? You right click and you say zip it up and you go. You can organize it how you like. It's up to you how you want to organize it because that catalog file is the guide to what the different files are. So that catalog file says where all the files are, what roles they play, and where they're located. So you can organize it really however you like. That said, I would organize it rather simply, and I would organize it along these lines. You're going to get this NIEM folder from your subset. When you generate your subset, that's going to give you the NIEM folder. So that's pretty set. People generally put all this stuff in an XSD folder because these are schema files. That's the extension for XSD. I've usually just put my extensions in a folder called extension. You don't have to. I just think it's a good practice. We have a folder for JSON stuff, just like there's a folder for schema stuff, there's a folder for JSON stuff. And then we put the sample in something called IEP sample. If an IEPD is an information exchange package documentation, an IEP is an information exchange package. It's the payload document, so that's where the samples go. You don't want to call it that? You want to call it XML? Fine, call it XML, it doesn't matter. As long as the catalog file, as long as the IEPD catalog file tells us that, then we're fine. But really, this is about as complex as the structure needs to be to represent this stuff. If you have more things you need, if you've got a whole bunch of diagrams, you make a folder called diagrams and you put them in there. That's fine. You can make it however you want, but generally keep it fairly simple. Keep it along these lines. Map Builder is going to help with that. Okay, so that's part of what Map Builder is going to do, is package these things together. But right now, it's just phase one. So that doesn't happen yet, but it's one of all the things that's coming later on down the line. So keep an eye on that. And then there's publishing. So publishing is an odd topic. The problem when I talk about publishing is that that implies that there's some place to which to publish. So a lot of IEPDs are out on websites for whatever organization made them. Where did I get the NIES IEPD? Well, I used to have it locally because I was working on it, but I have a different computer now and I realized I didn't have it. So I went to the hhs.gov website for Health and Human Services and I searched for NIES IEPD and came right up, downloaded it, showed you the master documentation. So that's really where most IEPDs, where most message specs currently live. They live out there on individual websites for the organizations who made them. And there's plenty out there, but they're not always easy to find. One of the good things about IEPD as a name is at least it's easy to search for. You can search for blah, blah, blah IEPD and probably get IEPDs for it. That will be a little harder with message spec. No doubt that'll be a little harder to search and find. There are two existing repositories. They're both woefully out of date and one isn't working right now. So the first one is called the IEPD Clearinghouse. And this actually wasn't a repository, this was a registry. It would hold metadata about IEPDs and then would have links to where those IEPDs were hosted somewhere else. So that NIES IEPD probably has a record in the clearinghouse that just has metadata about it and then a pointer to where it lives on the HHS website. So really just a registry, not a repository. This is still running and you can still go and search for stuff. The problem is you're going to get a lot of old stuff and very little new stuff. You're going to get a lot of NIEM 2.0 stuff. You're going to get some NIEM 1.0 stuff. You're going to get some GJXDM stuff. GJXDM was a justice-specific model, and it is what became NIEM. It is a precursor to NIEM. There were lots of IEPDs made for GJXDM. They're still available under that clearinghouse. The other one is, it's not really called Work with IEPDs, but that's the title, and so I treat that as the name. It's really just called like the IEPD repository, something like that. But when you load it up, it says Work with IEPDs as the title, and so I treat that as the title. That is also fairly old, and it should be populated with old IEPDs. That's actually a true repository where you could upload individual artifacts and then download a whole zip file of it all. You could actually do that, but it is also out of date and it is also not working, and we don't know why. We don't know why it's not working, and because it's so old, it's not a priority to get working. So what that tells us is there really aren't any reasonable repositories out there right now for you to go and find existing IEPDs and other existing message specifications. There just isn't one, and that makes it hard to reuse work. We like to say NIEM is about reuse. We like to say don't start from scratch. Use somebody else's work. If you're going to do X kind of exchange, look and see if somebody else has done it first, so that you can leverage their work. Unfortunately, right now it's hard to do that because it's hard to find them. You're reduced to really just doing general purpose internet searches, via Google or DuckDuckGo or whatever you like, and that's just how it is. Now the good news is so that there are new repositories coming. The first is a restricted repository. So if you've got a CAC, DoD CAC. Don't say CAC card. They get mad when you say CAC card. It's like Control Access Card, I think is what the acronym stands for. If you have a CAC, you'll probably be able to access this. If you're like me and you don't have any sort of security clearance at all, you cannot see this, so this does not do you any good. But for people who do have security clearances and are in DoD, are DoD contractors, they're going to be able to see this. They're going to be able to see what's going on. The rest of you won't. I can't either. I can't look at it either. So that's coming soon, and very soon. I think it's being stood up very, very soon. It's been under development for a while. The other repository is going to be an unrestricted one. There's a brand new unrestricted registry repository available. So you can get to it at NIEM.gov. There's a long about NIEM Message Exchange Package Map Registry Repository URL, but don't bother with the whole URL. Just go to NIEM.gov It's one of the featured things. And you can go there and you can search through various message specifications and IPDs that have been added to it. It is chock full of tasty legacy IPDs, just tons of them in there. If I scroll down, this is showing everything. So you'll see there are 51 pages of IPDs in here, and I had about 5 per page, so 250 or so. Most of these are legacy IPDs that were basically extracted from the two older legacy registry repositories. So the two older ones, neither are working particularly well. We were able to get all those IPDs from those repositories, put them in here. So there's already a lot of stuff here. There's a lot of features as well. You have a lot of different ways to filter results. You can do search terms. For example, recently I needed a copy of the FBI's NIBRS IEPD. So NIBRS, NIBRS, and hit apply, and here are all the NIBRS maps. And so there are some state-based ones, but what I wanted was, the actual federal one, and here it is here. So you get all this, you get the nice information, you get the name of the IPD, you get documentation about it, description, you get the different communities it's from. It's a little more information, what version of NIEM it is. So you can filter by search term, works great. You can filter by community. So if you filter, and I know you can't see them all, let's try to scroll down a little more so you can see the longer list. So these roughly match up to NIEM domains, but the idea is these are the different communities that are served by particular IPD. So if I want to look at human services, I can do that, hit apply, and I'll get just the human services ones. You'll see some of them are human services and justice together, because human services, especially the juvenile side, overlaps into justice an awful lot. So you see a lot of that as a combination. But you can see there's about 30 of them total in there for human services. You can, yeah, I think you can only pick one at a time though, so you can't pick two. Now you can only pick one at a time, one community. We go back to any, get them all again. You can also do it based on the NIEM version. So if I wanted just NIEM 2.1 IPDs, I could go ahead and apply and get a list of just those. So I could do that as well. Now there are some caveats to this to keep in mind. Caveat number one is that this stuff is legacy stuff, which means it's going to skew heavily towards older versions of NIEM. In fact, if I go and I search on NIEM 5.1, which is less than a year old, but reaching a year old, we don't get any results. We also aren't going to for NIEM 5. This is a brand new registry repository, at least at the time of me recording this, and there just aren't any new ones in there right now. But if I go back to 4.0, I'm going to find a bunch for 4.0, and I'll find even more for 3. So skews towards older versions of NIEM just because it's packed with legacy IEPDs and there aren't a lot of new ones yet. Similarly, it is very, very heavily justice oriented because NIEM comes originally from the GJXDM, which was a justice focused data model. So there's a ton of justice ones. So I'm going to see there's 42 pages and they're like 50 pages total, a lot of justice ones. So those are two caveats. Justice focused right now and focused on older versions of NIEM. But that will change as new IPDs get added, as new message specs get added to this registry repository. There'll be more current work in there for you to find. And those caveats don't mean there isn't valuable information in there. Tons of valuable information. It's a brand new product and it's not really fully populated with new stuff yet. So that'll become less of an issue. What do you do with these things when you find them? Well, you go and you view the resource. So let's just look at electronic court filing because it's the first thing. And you'll get more information. You'll get the NIEM version. You'll get a contact email that's Jim Cabral. That email is no longer correct, though. So I need to call somebody and say, hey, we need to update that email address. But there's the organization. It's an OASIS body. The same body that NIEM is joined in is now under OASIS. Justice specific, NIEM 4.0. There's no access control, no disclosures to worry about. But what's important is down here, there's two different things. There's the URL, and I can open that in a new tab. And that will show me, that'll get me to whatever they have as their online resources for that IPD. So for electronic court filing, you've got documentation and you've got different versions of the schemas out there. It'll be different for each IPD. It's just a link to the resources for that IPD if there are resources out there. Now, important to note here is that a third caveat is we can have some link rot because some of these are fairly old. So an older IPD that has a link to somewhere, there's no guarantee that link is still good. We've tried to clean up the links so that bad links are no longer aren't part of it, but we can't control that. We can't control the endpoint for these links. So there's going to be some link rot, but so far the ones I've tried have all worked. So I've been very happy with that. But this is also a repository, not just a registry. So sometimes there will also be documents that you can get directly. Instead of going to the link, I can just click on that and you see the little icon went flying to the side. That's Safari's way of saying, hey, I downloaded something and here it is right here. Safari also, if you wanted to, automatically unzips it, which is how I have it set up. And these are the same files you saw at that link, essentially. There's the schema stuff for it, and then there's a bunch of documentation as well that you can look at. And so you've got that for basically any of these IPDs. Every one of them is going to have either a URL or attached documents, oftentimes both. It kind of depends on which legacy system they came out of. One of the legacy systems allowed you to upload your files. The other legacy system was just links where you hosted the files elsewhere. So depending on which one they come from, you will see either a URL or documents or both. We took pains to not replicate IPDs from the two legacy repositories and registries. So you should not see repetition like that. Some of the NIEM folks spent a lot of time making sure this was nice and clean. So it's a really, really good resource. I definitely suggest you check it out. This is the main repository now for NIEM work. This is the place where NIEM work will be uploaded and you can access what other people have done. So please check it out. And that gets us to the final part of the wheel. That gets us to implementation. That gets us to actually making code. And I wish I had more to give to you. I wish I had lots of advice. But number one, I'm not that kind of implementer. I'm just not. I don't implement systems that exchange information. I write little tools. I write fun little tools to help me do NIEM. I write fun little tools to do other things too that aren't part of the training. I like to write little small scale tools. I'm kind of a web code hacker. I don't use big boy languages like Java. I'm trying to learn Java, but that's just not, I'm just a hacker who makes little tools. So I don't really know what to tell you in terms of how to implement. I know a lot about NIEM, but this is just not something I implement, so I just don't know. But remember, NIEM is just the payload document. Remember that OSI diagram and all the diagrams about scope of NIEM. When you're sending information, there's a whole lot that goes on. A whole lot of different layers. And the NIEM part's just the payload document. It's just building the XML, and then when it gets to the other end, taking it back apart and pulling the data out of it. And there's nothing special about a NIEM message exchange other than the payload. The rest of it's however you do things. So NIEM is just plain old XML. Okay, maybe with referencing if you want to use referencing or if you're doing metadata, although the metadata referencing will probably go away in NIEM 6. Or it's just plain JSON. Well, okay, it is JSON LD. It's a little more complicated. Again, there might be referencing, but if you don't want the referencing, for the most part, you don't have to do it. So if you can implement an XML exchange, you can implement a NIEM XML exchange. If you can implement a JSON exchange, you can implement a NIEM JSON exchange, although it's going to be a little harder because you're still going to have to mess with XML and XML schema to get the stuff to mirror in the JSON. So it's a little harder. That'll get better this time next year, whenever this time next year is, because it should be by the end of the year. We'll have much better support for JSON, and it'll be able to be more of a peer with XML. Remember the scope of NIEM. Things outside the payload aren't NIEM. If you're outside the payload, you're not NIEM. You're the all other things around. And so you don't have to do anything special for NIEM outside of its scope. Nothing special. Sending a NIEM exchange, sending a NIEM payload document is the same as sending any other XML payload document. It's just the same thing. So if you can send XML now, you can send NIEM XML. There's nothing special about it, and certainly nothing special with the different layers that go around it. If you're doing If you're doing REST interfaces, you're still doing REST interfaces. If you're old school and doing SOAP, you're still doing SOAP. However you're doing it, if you're encrypting your stuff, you're still encrypting your stuff. Your privacy controls are still your privacy controls. Your access controls are still the same access controls. NIEM purposely keeps a really tight scope so it can focus on the payload document. And that means that everything around it is all up to you, and it's all the stuff you already do when you're exchanging NIEM stuff. Now, if you don't exchange XML, then yeah, you've got a lot to learn. If you're starting from scratch and you've never done any coding and you have to start figuring out a system, yeah, there's a lot to learn, but most of it's not NIEM, and most of it I can't help you with. There are other resources out there to learn about the other technologies. Skill level to implement. Developers with skills to design and implement a data exchange can learn the NIEM approach in a matter of hours. Now, it's not like 2 or 3 hours. Go add up how long this training was. That's how long it takes. So it takes a while. When we do this class live, not live in front of an audience, but virtually live with people on, which we do, it takes 12 hours total. It's 3 afternoons, 1 to 5 each day. It takes 12 hours total to cover all these materials. That's including questions, demos, everything you've seen. It takes 12 hours. Developer training is available. You're at the tail end of it. So we've gone through. This is a developer training. There are plenty of example IPDs in the world to follow. The problem is they're a little hard to find right now. Again, you're generally reduced to doing general internet searches, but that will work. I did not have trouble finding the NICE IEPD. In fact, I didn't think I even went to the HHS site. I think I just typed NICE IEPD into Google and I got to the right thing. So you can still find them out there. They're just harder to find than if we had a centralized registry repository. But that will get better. If you have clearance to restricted materials, it'll get better fairly soon, really soon actually. For the rest of us, we have to wait a little longer, but it will get better. Don't start from scratch. Leverage shared IEPDs. Go out there and find ones that do what you want to do and use them as a base. That's easy to say, but a little difficult to do right now, but that's the idea. And then finally here, the NIEM's technical specifications, well, they're complex. However, you don't need to read them all. You should probably read the IEPD spec, but you don't need to read the NDR spec. And then there are tools to perform most of the conformance checking. So let's go take a look at that for our final demo. So we need to go and find Contessa. So how do you validate stuff? Well, what you do is you upload one of your schemas, and then it will run all the NDR rules that it can against it. So let's go do that. So let's go get our IEPD, go to our training folder, and get our crash driver IEPD, and let's look at our extension, see if we did a good job with our extension. So we'll load up the extension, and it doesn't take long. It runs through it. It comes back with this report. Now, what I like about Contessa over using schematron rules in Oxygen is that you do get a report. I think that's really valuable. So the first thing you see here is the name of the file you gave it, the extension.xsd, and you get 4 boxes. The first box is gray. It says 54%. If you hover over it, I think you get, it might tell you, yep, rules not executed. So some rules in the NDR are not understandable to computers. They're human judgment rules. You can't make a schematron rule to check human judgment rules. So some of that 54% is stuff that just isn't the kind of rule that we can check with an automated tool. Some of that 54% are rules that didn't apply to the extension schema we uploaded. So there might be rules about features of NIEM that we just didn't use. Now, we used all the major features, but there's still things we didn't do that we could have done. So there are going to be rules that just don't apply to what we've done, even though they're able to be checked in an automated way. The next box over is the green box, and this is the percentage of rules that you passed, that it was able to check, and they were rules that you did stuff that fell under those rules, and this is how many of them you did great on. And as you can see, 54 plus 46 is 100%. We got everything right. Everything we did that there are rules for and that it can automatically check for, it checked, and we passed all that. And I would hope so, because I've checked this before and would have fixed any mistakes. The yellow box is how many are, these are warnings. So this is how many where there were warnings. Maybe it's not sure if you passed or not. There's some questions there. And then the red box, that's the percentage of rules you failed. So, if you did some things wrong, you get a percentage there. You failed some of the rules. Now, earlier versions of Contessa put the whole 54% under red, because the idea was, well, I couldn't check them, so you haven't passed them yet. So they're under red, and we convinced them that that's really demoralizing, to give us a fail for things just because you can't check it. So now this really is the number of rules that you failed. 158 total rules. Of those, 46% applied to our extension schema and were checkable by Contessa and passed. So if you want to actually get the report, though, sometimes you have to reload the page before these show up. I'm not sure why. It'll give you a report in Excel, in XML if you want to parse it for whatever reason and do something to it, but then in HTML. And I like the HTML one the best because it just looks nice and it's easy to print it off to a PDF. What do you do if you print it to a PDF? Well, then I would put that PDF inside my message specification as one of my artifacts. That's what I would do. That's what I typically do. So here's the report. Says the thing you looked at, and then it's got a rule summary. So here's a little more information. You auto-passed 73 rules, that's 46%. Here's what that means. You didn't auto-fail anything. You manual pass, these are things you have to manually verify, so Contessa just ignores them because Contessa can't do that. Manual fail, these are rules that weren't checked by Contessa and you have to validate by hand. This is kind of a throwback to the old version that counted things that couldn't run, things that couldn't check as fails. And so that's why those are there like that. And then there's rules that weren't run at all. 85 rules weren't run. Either they didn't apply or they just are rules that can't be checked. And then if you go down, you get a little more information about the rules that you passed and failed. And here you get a list of all the rules. And this is the good part. On the left is a status, auto passed or not run. If there were warnings, there would be warnings here in yellow. If there were fails, there would be fails here in red. So those are all cool. You look at all those. The second column is the name, and the results, I'm not sure. The results might be a different number if you fail. The name is the name of the rule, so it tells you a little bit about the rule. The description of the rule is unfortunately a bug that's being worked on. This is supposed to have a description of that rule so that the rule makes a little more sense. Unfortunately, it's not functioning that way right now, and it's a little low on the priority scale. So it'll get fixed at some point, but I don't know when. Not fixed now, but you can still find any of these rules in the NDR. You can just search on that text, and that'll find you the rule in the NDR. So this stuff's all in the NDR if you really want to look the rules up. This is a really nice report. I like it. It looks nice. It has a nice pie chart at the beginning to show your auto pass. It'd be even nicer if this were in green, but it's not. But it's a nice report. And if you're in a browser, then you just do a print, you just export it as PDF, and there you go. You put that in your IEPD along with your conformance assertion as part of your evidence that you did a good job and that you actually conformed to the NIEM rules. So there's Contessa. Again, all these rules can also be applied directly in an XML editor, both Oxygen and XML Spy. Again, XML Spy requires a plugin. Oxygen has got it built in so that you could just go and run your stuff as you work and find things out. So that's handy too. That's good for in progress. But I like the summary report because this I can put into my message spec at the end. And that's it. We're done. We've finished the training. We've gone through all the different aspects of NIEM. We've gone all the way through the process for developing a message specification. Now, well, you're not experts at NIEM, but you've got a clue. You've got a clue. You've got a base to move on from and do continued work from. I'm going to leave you with some resources. So this next section are resources to help you, a variety of different resources. There's tons of stuff on the internet out there specifically to help you go forward using NIEM. So that gets us finally to resources. We're done with the training. This has covered everything. Let's take a quick look at resources just so that we know what they all are. We've got documentation resources. So this is where you go get all the NIEM releases. Let me just show you it really quick. We did it before to download, but here are all the releases, including NIEM 5.2 under development. And when that gets available as an alpha, you'll be able to download it here. The NIEM community wants to know your opinion, wants you to try out pre-release versions of NIEM to give us feedback as to whether it's working right for you. So you can go back all the way to NIEM 1.0. You've got the NIEM specifications. The NIEM specifications, there's the NDR, naming and design rules. There's the IEPD spec, but there's also a spec about JSON. So if you're one of the JSON developers and you want to know a little more about using NIEM with JSON, here's where you go. There's a conformance spec that talks more about conformance. We talked about it in a little. If you want to know more about conformance, you can go here. That conformance target attribute has a spec all on its own. You don't need it, because if you're doing work, there's one value for conformance target and one value only, so you don't have to worry about that. There's a spec about code lists. There's additional fancy things you can do with code lists. Most people don't do it. There's a specification. Most people just have flat code lists though. But this gets into generic code, and you can do some fancy things, multi-column code tables. Interesting things. If you have advanced code table needs, you might want to take a look at that spec. And then the high-level versioning architecture. This is all about the numbering, things like that. This is not interesting. Don't bother with this. It's just not an interesting spec, and there's not a lot for you there. But it is one of the specifications. It's being sunsetted, and the important stuff just being moved into other materials. Then we've got materials, the JSON spec specifically. It's also listed in the specification. And then we have materials from this course. So here's NIEM training. Here's everything. This is all a bunch of work product too. So there's a lot of files here, but you can get to the important stuff here. The document we've been working through is here under NIEM training, master NIEM training document. There's a shorter syllabus available. There are all the mapping spreadsheets in Excel and in Numbers and as PDFs. There's all the little text files we worked on are all there. And the crash driver IEPD is there in its entirety as well. There's a lot of other files in here because I was doing development kind of in public where people could see. This is going to get cleaned up very, very soon, leaving just the important stuff. It just hasn't been cleaned up yet. So that's documentation. Whole bunch of tools. There's the SSGT. We've seen a lot of the SSGT. There's Contessa. We just saw a demo of Contessa, so now we know what Contessa does and how it works. Go ahead, make yourself an account there. Literally takes 10 seconds to make an account, and most of that is saying, is this a crosswalk? Is this a traffic light? To prove you're not a robot. So you want Contessa there because that's the main way to check your work. But you can also check your work inside an XML editor using the actual schematron rules that underlie the NDR, so you can download those. Map Builder is out there for you to play with. It's on SourceForge. Go ahead and try it. You need to install Docker first, but it works. The installation is good, and give it a shot and play with that. There's Wayfair at NIEM5.org. NIEM5.org is my site where I keep my tools. There are other tools as well that we didn't get into here. I think I spent enough time on my own tools as is, but NIEM5.org is where I put my tools, my NIEM stuff. When NIEM 6 comes out, I will have NIEM6.org as well. So go there. There are some other tools to play with there if you want. That's where HyperNIEM is, the HTML version of the schemas. Of course, that's where Wayfair is as well. The Oxygen snippets that you apply as templates, and then you can just pop up templates for the different NIEM things. That's located at this link. And then finally the linter. If you want to play with the linter, please remember the linter is under development. It's a very early version of it, but it does seem to work. And if you like my spreadsheet format, mapping spreadsheet format, then linter can help you out. If you don't like my format, linter doesn't help you out, and that's perfectly fine. Use whatever format you like. If you like the NIEM mapping template, then Map Builder is the tool for you because Map Builder uses that template. And if you do your own custom template, that's just fine. Tools aren't going to work directly with it. Map Builder will have an import feature, I think, to import other formats of mapping spreadsheets, but that's coming in the future. That's not here now. And then we have repositories. There's the IEPD clearinghouse. Let me just show you it really quickly. And you just gotta launch it. And it comes up and it's a search. I'm just saying I'm gonna search. There's also a knowledge base, but the knowledge base is very old and I would not rely on it. And give them feedback on this old thing if you want. You can filter things, you can search. Let's just say arrest. There's got to be something. Oh, and it already came up things. I typed in arrest, got arrest warrant IEPDs, arrest incident report. There's a lot of stuff in here. There's a lot of stuff. 354 total IEPDs in this repository, but they're all old. Does that mean they're worthless? No, it does not mean they're worthless. They're going to be packed with documentation. They're going to be packed with UML diagrams that might be helpful to you. They're going to be packed with schemas, and they're going to be old schemas, but they're also likely, the NIEM ones are going to have a want list with, which you could then run through the migration tools. We haven't looked at the migration tools because it's really, you don't have anything to migrate yet, right? But the migration tools are easy to use, and so you can even migrate these older exchanges to a current version. You'll see this one right here is NIEM 2.0. So this is useful. It's got useful artifacts and useful information into it. You're just not going to get anything new, is the unfortunate part. And then the last one is the IEPD repository, which is called Works with IEPDs. And from here you can do a search. You can tell it runs on the same service as the SSGT. It looks just like the SSGT. I can do a search, and I can type arrest. But unfortunately, unless things have changed, I don't get any results. And I guarantee you there would have been something in there with the word arrest in it. So it's not functioning. I can't tell you when it will be because it's low on the priority list, especially with new repositories around the corner. But that's there as well. So that winds up the training material. Let me swoop all the way to the beginning. We're going to go really quick, all the way to the top of the program. So final words. This is NIEM. This is NIEM training. Work your way through it. Review the parts that don't make sense to you. Take a look. Make sure you go and look at it online. This whole document's available to you all the time. It gets updated frequently. Every time I make changes to it, they get pushed up to the GitHub repository so you get the new copy. If you have direct questions, you can contact me at my email address. It's on there on the screen, thomas.carlson@gtri.gatech.edu. And that's how Georgia Tech folks say it. They say GATech. So that's the email address for me. You go ahead and email me with questions, perfectly fine. There is also contact forms on the NIEM.gov site that you can go to get help as well. Lots of resources are available to you. I know there's a lot of material. I know there's a lot of complex stuff to consume and understand, but there are folks out there to help you move on past this training. So please reach out to us when you have questions. And there we have it. That's the NIEM training. Now, hopefully you have a really good idea. You've got a whole list of resources you can go to find out more. At this point, go forth and prosper with NIEM. Go do some NIEM work. Go be part of the NIEM community. Go talk to other NIEM people. And if you have questions, ask us. We're here to answer the questions. My email address is in the materials, but there is a contact us form on the NIEM.gov website. Please ask questions. Don't suffer in silence if you're having a problem with NIEM. We're here to help you. We're here to answer those questions. So thank you for your time. I hope you found this training valuable.